Well, at the beginning of September, we spent some time thinking about the way in which lockdown had had a huge impact on the way in which we view authority. And then the next week, we spent some time thinking about how it's impacted our mental well-being, and in particular, how it's had an increase on the levels of anxiety that we all face. Well, today we're continuing our series in Lessons from Lockdown, and we're thinking about the issue of security or insecurity. So what I want you to do is just take a moment to think. Ask yourself this question: where do you find security? Maybe even think back to this time last year. What were you doing in October 2019? And what was it that gave you security at that point? Maybe it was waking up each morning knowing that your loved one was safe. Maybe it was stirring to your alarm clock to a new day of work. Maybe it was being awoken by that monotonous but strangely comforting routine of trying to get the kids up and dressed and out of the house and to school. Maybe it was just gently sipping your coffee over breakfast, considering your carefully planned social diary. Or maybe, if you're honest, even before the pandemic, you sensed a lack of security. And actually, the pandemic's only served to heighten that. Well, here's the thing. Security is found for all of us, not just in one place, not just in one person or one thing, but in a whole nexus of touch points that provide life's reassuring hooks for us to hang our days on. For some of us, that means set routines that we follow, and for others of us, it's knowing that we have the freedom to do as we please within our own parameters. And in the same way that we find comfort and security and warmth in our favourite chair, we also find security in the everyday familiarity, in the routines, in the things that we're used to doing. So when coronavirus came along and changed almost everything overnight, that threw up for all of us issues around where we find our security, where we look for our security. Because if we were to try and boil down where we find security to a one-word answer, it would be control. Whether or not we're in control of our money, whether we're in control of our health, whether we're in control of our relationships, or whether we're in control of our activities. And the problem for us is that coronavirus all of a sudden took away all of our control. So let's consider two areas. Two ways in which we feel increasingly insecure because our control has been taken away. And the first area I want to look at and think about is job security and wealth that goes with that. All the books and in fact the people who speak on good money management will tell you that what you need to do is save 3 months worth of expenditure. And if you do that, you should be safeguarded from the worst things that could happen. Maybe many of you have been putting money into pension pots that are linked to the stock market, to indexes, for decades, and now you're relying on them for a steady income. For others of you, you've been working hard in your place of work, diligently trying to make yourself invaluable to your company or organisation. And then along came coronavirus. And in the UK, almost 9 million people found themselves furloughed, which by definition means there was no meaningful work to do. And that included myself and many others who are part of our church family. In America, it was even worse. 16 million jobs were lost in the 3 weeks between the end of March and the middle of April. And according to a recent Financial Times article that I read, for every one person applying for a job this time last year, there are at least 2.5 people applying for that same role. Well, in June of 2020, just a few months ago, the 60 recent graduates that I have the great pleasure of working with and mentoring finished their time with us. Some of them left and they entered workplaces that they were intending to go into. But for others, the reality of finishing with us was very different. I can remember speaking to one guy who had studied aerospace engineering and was hoping to go into the industry. And yet he had no career prospects because the aerospace industry was decimated by coronavirus. I can remember speaking to a girl who'd fought really hard to get a relatively high-level management position in the hospitality industry, only to be informed that the hotel chain with which she was supposed to be working was no longer offering her that position. See, coronavirus took control away from us. And as I look on my LinkedIn profile, as I look around at recent graduates, many of them are still struggling to get jobs. Not just jobs that they've trained for, that they've got degrees for, just any job. And it's not just young people and recent graduates. This has meant that contracts have been rewritten. Some of us have had hours reduced. Others have faced redundancy after decades of service. See, whether we thought that we could find security and control in the size of our savings or in the stability of our job, the lockdown and the effects of the coronavirus have put those ideas of control and security found in our finances to bed. Because after 7 months, we're just entering a second period of tighter restrictions. The economy is unlikely to bounce back in the way that many had hoped. And so as we reflect on this morning, on the issue of security, it's worth seeing that as we think about financial security, coronavirus has exposed us. And yet what we need to remember is that this isn't just about statistics on a sheet. For every one person who's a statistic of redundancy, that's a family's livelihood gone. It's about being able to afford food that week, whether or not the heating can be turned on this autumn as winter lies in wait. All of which reminded me of a scene from the film Moneyball.